All my friends are bright red. Spoon Man.
Digital gramophone makes no sense.
So today I'm going to do a video about one of my favorite bands, Spoon. Generally when people do these types of videos, they kind of go through a discography, through a collection, and they start at that band's first album and they kind of chronologically go through their discography. Just to make this as confusing as I can for everybody involved, I'm going to do this autobiographically. So I'm going to talk about the albums as I discovered them, when I discovered them. Spoon. Though I will set this up by saying Spoon is a band that was started in Austin, Texas. They're a quote-unquote indie rock band. Not too experimental, I wouldn't say. Maybe in the studio they are. I think that they're one of the best rock bands going today. I would objectively argue that as much as I subjectively will, because I'm obviously biased. Spoon is a band that I've been into for close to 20 years now. I discovered them my final year in college, 2001. I was on the 5.5-year plan. And I didn't discover them in any kind of there's no special story to how I discovered Spoon. I didn't bump into them in the grocery store or date, one of their little sisters or even see them live for the first time. I just read a review of this album in Spin, Girls Can Tell by Spoon. It was released again in 2001 on Merge Records. That's the CD that I bought in 2001. This is an original press vinyl that I actually found last year at Tip Top Daily Market. Now, I don't think original presses are that important to own by this band, but because I am such a fan and because they are one of the few bands that I kind of collect, I decided it was important to pick this up. And then I traded in one of the reissues that I had of it on vinyl. Let's talk a little bit just a quick bit about Girls Can Tell. So I discovered this in 2001. At the time, I was really kind of diving in the 2001. I was really starting to kind of dive into indie rock for the first time. I was already into bands that were, kind of more higher profile alternative bands. I was a big Radiohead fan. In the late 90s, I was way into alt country, and so I was so hyper focused on that. That was kind of more the underground stuff that I was into. But in the early 2000s, some friends of mine started introducing me to bands like Modest Mouse, Death Cab for Cutie, Built to Spill, and the like. And couple that with, I was kind of shoring up musical history in a way. I was going back and buying albums, classic albums that I felt like everybody should own or at least be familiar with, from the 60s into the 70s and even into the later 70s, like the post-punk, like punk and post-punk era, late 70s stuff. And at the time, I was hardcore into Elvis Costello. And when I read the review for this album, I thought that it kind of, based on what they were writing, I felt like it maybe had some ties to those things that I was into. And it definitely does. It's definitely an album that is inspired by kind of late 70s, post-punk sound that kind of embraced, rock and roll, but was inspired by, the groundbreaking sound of punk. at least in its attitude, right? Like the Pretenders and Elvis Costello, the Clash, bands like that. And this definitely pays homage to a lot of those acts. It's definitely a continuation, part of a lineage of that sound. Some of my favorite tracks on here are Everything Hits at Once, the title track, Believing Is Art, Anything You Want is probably my favorite song off this album. Great tune. Girls Can Tell. This was actually Spoon's third album, but the first one that I discovered.
We go through all the same lines and sell out to appease, but go to sleep in a bed of lies. I made my own more than once or twice, and now time is my time. Time is my own, and I feel so alive, yet feel so alone. 'Cause you know you're the one, and if that hasn't changed since you were 19 and still in school, waiting on a light on the corner of a South Street.
Around 2001, into 2002, I can't remember when exactly. I remember where I was. But I was back home. I was wandering aimlessly around a local mall near where I grew up, and full of hope and, a gleam in my eye for the future. Not really. And I saw a record store that was closing. They had a clearance sale sign out front. So this was around the time that a lot of those stores and malls were going out of business. They just weren't surviving. And, like Best Buys and Barnes and Nobles and just even the internet in general were putting them out of business. And so I walked in there and I stumbled upon so much great stuff. I bought probably 20, 25 CDs for like $1, $2 at the most. I found Sloan's One Chord to Another in there, Bell and Sebastian's If You're Feeling Sinister, Built to Spills, There's Nothing Wrong with Love, and this one, Telephono by Spoon. This is their 1996 debut on Matador Records. It was recently reissued this year. The Slay on Q Spoon catalog reissues. So the first time in 24 years this was put out on vinyl. I was ecstatic about that. This being their first album, it's not their best. And it's not anywhere close. Probably my least favorite Spoon album. Definitely, my least favorite Spoon album. But that's just kind of by default, because they really hadn't found themselves yet. They really hadn't figured out their sound. Every review of this album said the same thing. It sounds like the Pixies. And it does. It sounds a lot like the Pixies. There was even a female bass player in the band who sang backing vocals. It's not quite as wild as the Pixies, but it sounds like the Pixies for sure. And they just hadn't quite found themselves. It's still not a bad album. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Some of my favorite songs are Not Turning Off, All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed, Nefarious, The Government Darling is a great song. But yeah, a serviceable debut album for sure. I think Matador was really happy with them. Okay, so now I have their third and their first albums. And I'm really loving Girls Can Tell. But now I have another album by them, and so I decided to look them up online. And that's where I discovered this EP, Soft Effects EP, which was released right on the heels of Telephono. This came out in 1997. Now they really started to experiment a little bit more on here. And from everything that I've read and some things that I've even listened to recently, they're big fans of this EP. They're very proud of this release. And it's still not the sound that the fully flushed Spoon sound, I think that the Girls Can Tell is really when they started to sound like Spoon, really, in my opinion. But there's still some really good stuff, and you can start to hear some of that in this. The song Mountain to Sound, the lead track, is this huge sounding rock song. It's so good. It's very epic. Waiting for the Kid to Come Out and I Could See the Dude are outstanding songs. This was a really strong EP. I never had a physical copy of that until this was reissued this year. This is a limited edition 500 on blue vinyl. There's a red. There's 500 red. And then there's just more unlimited quantity with a different cover that was the CD artwork that came out at the time. Fun little fact about this one, real quick. Those letters, Spoon, those letters were cut from the masthead of the magazine for No Depression, which was a magazine that was about like all country music. Well, they're not an all country band, but it was funny that they cut those letters out from the masthead and turned it into the band name. Used it as the band logo for a few years. So in 2002, they released their fourth studio album, Kill the Moonlight. This is again on Merge. This is my favorite Spoon album. I don't know if that will ever change. It hasn't in 18 years. But this album is amazing. It's just so intelligent, so smart. It's meticulously crafted. There's some good amount of stuff going on in here. There's a lot of overdubs and things like that. There's some horn parts. A lot of keys and piano have been used since Girls Can Tell now in the band. They would have touring keyboardists in the early years, but like it's an expert class in minimalism. There's just, it's kind of hard to explain, but even though there are all these overdubs and there's all these different parts being played and things being written and different guitar sounds and drum sounds and whatever, things are kind of faded in and faded out. It's not all happening at once. And it's just, I don't know. It's just hard. It's kind of difficult to explain, but at least for me, but, it's just an expertly crafted album. One of the best things, in my opinion, that was ever released in the 2000s. The Way We Get By is a well-known song amongst people that are kind of into indie rock. You've probably heard it maybe used in some TV shows or movies or something if you're into that. Small Stakes, The Way We Get By, Stay Don't Go, Jonathan Fisk, Paper Tiger. The song Back to the Life, a snippet of that song is in my channel intro. Kill the Moonlight from 2002. Here's the CD that I bought way back when. On the success of that album, it didn't sell a ton, but it had a great critical response, and the band was touring more, and people were starting to learn more about them. Girls Can Tell, Kill the Moonlight, there was some momentum built. Merge reissued this album, a series of sneaks, which came out in 1998. So this was their second album. Merge put it out on this CD, which has two bonus cuts on it. Lafitte Don't Fail Me Now and The Agony of Lafitte. Lafitte being spelled Laffitte. And that's the last name of their A&R guy at the time. This was originally put out on Elektra Records, or a subsidiary of Elektra. They were signed to Elektra. This is an actual early-ish press. I can't remember. It's not an actual first. It's on Vapor Records. It's a red translucent. This is not easy to find. But anyway, that A&R guy didn't really work very hard for the band. And he ended up quitting Elektra, and when he quit, the band was dropped. Which in the late 90s, that was generally a death sentence for a band. But in Spoon's case, it actually turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him, because then they got to go on and make the music they wanted to make the art that they wanted to make. Kind of carries on a little bit of that sound from Telephono. It's just a little bit more focused. That kind of Pixies influenced guitar, bass, and drums sound. There's a couple of tracks on here that are very lo-fi. It sounds like could be a Guided by Voices record or something. But yeah, this is some solid stuff. With the release of this and this, having these two CDs in 2002, they were officially my favorite band now. So I would try to just get my hands on anything that I could by them at that point. I was buying stickers, posters on eBay. I was buying 7 inches. This one is For Someone Something, which is off of Kill the Moonlight. The bonus B-side is this the last time, and In the Right Place, the Right Time. Both of those tracks are actually also on this CD single for Stay Don't Go. I bought this CD single for The Way We Get By, or I guess it's kind of an EP because there's 6 tracks that are live radio performances. And then it's also a DVD. So there are 3 videos for Small Stakes, The Way We Get By, and Jonathan Fisk. Videos for those songs. I also bought this 7-inch around that time, 30-gallon tank. It's kind of a 7-inch EP with 3 extra tracks, car radio, an alternate take of that, which was on Series of Sneaks. I Could Be Underground, and Revenge. 30-gallon tank was also on Series of Sneaks. Some pretty cool stuff. This is a weird 7-inch because I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can read it. But under side A, it says 33 1/3 RPM, and it's not. It's 45 RPM. So it's a rude awakening if you have your record player set to what it tells you should. I don't know if it was some joke or what, but I also picked up this, around that time, this EP, Love Ways, which was released originally in 2000. So right before Girls Can Tell. I also have Love Ways on vinyl. This was an RSD release. 2005, they released Gimme Fiction. And this is when they really kind of became more of a real household name. The single off of this, first single off of this was I Turn My Camera On, which is a really kind of dancey, funky kind of track. Kind of sounds like the Bee Gees almost, you know? It's I don't know, it's really, really cool. Or like Miss You by the Rolling Stones is maybe even a more accurate descriptor or comparison. But anyway, this is a 10th anniversary edition reissue. It's a double LP that's got a booklet on the inside. Sorry, I'm not really a lot of words, pictures. But it's the original LP on one disc, and then demos and B-sides, non-album cuts on the second LP. But I Turn My Camera On was actually used in a Jaguar commercial, which was really weird. That kind of blew my mind at the time. But that was happening for a lot of bands in the early 2000s. A lot of indie bands in the early 2000s started having their music show up in commercials and TV shows and movies. I don't know if it was like maybe younger people were starting to work in the ad world or something, and who knows. But that's how they made their money, by publishing rights. because these guys weren't selling records. This one might have gone gold. They might have sold 100,000 of this. I can't remember. They were definitely, they'd already done like, so they, I think on this album, that's when they did Austin City Limits maybe for the first time. Maybe it was before that. They were a regular book on late night TV at this point. Especially on shows like, you know, Conan that was on later, or, you know, Letterman always booked really good bands in the 2000s. But yeah, Spoon's Gimme Fiction. Some of my favorite songs on this are The Beast and Dragon Adored, I Summon You, The Infinite Pet, They Never Got You. This gets away from the minimalism of To Kill a Moonlight, and it's a much more, it's a bigger sounding album. In 2007, they put out Gaga Gaga Gaga, or Gaga Gaga Gaga. I don't know how you say it. I've always hated this album title, but it's an amazing album. This is probably my second favorite Spoon album, and this one they really took off with this one. This was still on Merge. They were still on Merge Records. The song The Underground was a big, The Underdog was a big, pretty big single for a band, you know, in this time, for an indie rock band. Pretty big single. You know, incredible reviews for this. It's probably a good place to start. If you're interested in them once I'm done with this video and you want to look them up. The Underdog had some production by John Bryan. Some of the other really good songs on here, you got your Cherry Bomb, Don't You Ever, Rhythm and Soul. The final track, Black Like Me, is a fantastic ending track. You know, the one thing that I love about Spoon, and you really hear it on this album, and you hear it in places on their previous albums, is that the R&B influence is really there in their music. Kind of the same way that it inspired like combos from the mid-60s, like Spencer Davis Group, or even the way it influenced like Elvis Costello, or Paul Weller and the Jam, you know. R&B is a huge part of the foundation of Spoon's sound, you know. And like I said earlier, I really think that this band is part of a lineage of just rock and roll at its core. Even as experimental as they might be compared to some other bands, I just really feel like they're, you know, carrying a torch, you know. 2010, they released Transference. And this album is a little bit more of a hodgepodge of all of the different kind of sounds and things that they did on their previous albums. So to me, as a fan, as a hardcore fan, when this came out, I thought it just kind of sounded like a really, really good B-sides album. It's just kind of all over the place. There's moments of like lo-fi that they had abandoned until they put this out. The band self-produced this, and I think that that's kind of why. It's a testament to how important a producer can be when you're recording an album. Somebody to kind of keep you focused. There's still some really great stuff on here. Written in Reverse, one of my favorite Spoon songs. One of the best songs they ever wrote. Incredible rock song on this album. But yeah, there's straight ahead rock. There's lo-fi loose sounding stuff. There's danceable tracks. There's epic productions. It's just kind of all over the place. But yeah, Written in Reverse is good. Got Nothing. Out Go the Lights, good track. Is Love Forever. That's a really good one. Still, it's still a really good album, don't get me wrong. I'd still give it like a 7.5 out of 10. All right, so it'd be 4.5 years before they put out their next album, which is They Want My Soul. So 2014. The band just kind of took a break from each other for a little while. Britt Daniel, the lead singer, principal songwriter, he started a side project called Divine Fits. In that band, he met Alex Fischel and brought Alex Fischel in to Spoon, a multi-instrumentalist, probably the most talented musician that's ever been in the band. I don't know. Jim Eno is one of the better drummers in modern rock music, in my opinion. Less is more. Just expert, professional guy. But Alex Fischel, as a multi-instrumentalist, probably one of the more talented guys, the most talented guy they've ever had in the band. But They Want My Soul is really, really good. Kind of the funny thing about this album, interesting fact about this album, was they kind of did this exercise where Britt had written some of the songs, and he brought the songs to the band, and then they listened through them a little bit, and then he said, let's play this. It's kind of a game, I guess, where it's like, take this famous song, and then you rewrite the song that's intended for this album, rewrite that song based on that song. So it's like, Britt was listening to AC/DC a lot at the time for some reason. And the song Rent I Pay, the lead track, has some crazy crunchy guitars in it. It doesn't sound like AC/DC, but it was elements of AC/DC that inspired him to take that song in a certain direction or to sound a certain way. And that's kind of what they did. So they weren't ripping off anybody. They were just taking in small things, inspiration from certain things, certain songs, to inspire this album. Half of this album was produced by Joe Ciccarelli, who's like a longtime producer. I think he worked with the Bee Gees. And then the other half of the album is produced by Dave Fridman, who actually engineered the whole thing. And Dave Fridman's influence is paramount to this album. Those of you that are familiar with Fridman as a producer, he loves distortion, and as a musician, and there's some crazy distorted sounds on this album. In particular, one moment on the song "Knock Knock Knock," where when they went to learn how to play the songs live, they couldn't even remember how to make that sound. So they called Dave Fridman, and they were like, "How did we do that?" And he couldn't remember, like what combination of pedals and shit that they had strung together in the studio to make it.
You said you were living in a buttoned up world, living in 1892. I know what nothing they could say to convince me, or to blame nobody but you.
Some of my favorite songs are They Want My Soul, which was the first time they ever had a title track on any of their albums. New York Kiss, Inside Out, and Rainy Taxi is one of my favorite Spoon songs. It's got this bridge, and once you hear that bridge, you want it to happen like 5 or 6 more times in the song, but it's not going to, because it's a bridge. You don't have that happen with a bridge, right? Just killer stuff. This was like a pre-order version of it. That overlay print on this cover is like glows in the dark or something. It's Translucent Blue. I don't know what the point of that was. But it's really probably the only duplicate that I have left of Spoon stuff anymore.
I came home last night, I had no good news. I came home last night, I had no good news. And you received me through the brightest flash of apocalyptic crime. And if you leave, I'll never sing another tune. Ah, put on your red shoes, sing it to me, lover girl. When you do my love, I forget the world. And if you say run, I may run with you. I got nothing else, I got nowhere else.
2017, Spoon puts out Hot Thoughts. Just another great album. There's a lot of new wave influence on this. I also think that it's kind of funky, more danceable all the way throughout. I think Britt was listening to a lot of Prince at the time, kind of in the wake of his death. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a fantastic album. Funny story about this one is that when they put it out, they kind of did like this Willy Wonka golden ticket thing. And there are only 2 copies of this pressed on green vinyl. And if you bought one of those copies that was pressed on green, you got to go to any Spoon show that you wanted to that year. They would pay for travel and everything. And even though there are only 2 copies, if you go on Discogs, there are like 180 people that say they have it, which just, shows how much of a joke Discogs is. But yeah, Hot Thoughts by Spoon. It's just another great one. Their latest studio effort. And then this best of comp. The best of Spoon. Everything hits at once. As a fan, sometimes when you're so close to a band, the greatest hits just doesn't make any sense. How can this single LP of 12 tracks, 13 tracks sum up this band that I love so much, that puts out so many great full albums, But, it's not bad. The sequencing of it bothers me a little bit. I think it's good that they mixed it up and didn't do it straight chronological. It also picks up with Girls Can Tell, so the first couple albums aren't even represented on this. But yeah, and then it's got a new song, No Bullets Spent. The 7-inch came with the album that was recorded. This was put out last year. I think Britt in an interview said that he was inspired by like The Cure, when The Cure did a greatest hits. When was that? 86 or so. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe a good place to start. Maybe pick this up, maybe listen to it, see what you think. If there's a song on here that sticks out to you, then maybe check the album out that song is on. Sorry, I know this one ran a little long, but we're going through 9 studio albums and some extra stuff. I did the best I could to keep it down. Anyway, hope everybody's doing well out there. Yeah, take care. All right, bye.